Hey, everyone. If this is your first time listening to the MercyCast, I want to encourage you, follow us on social media at MercyCast Pod. This is the best way to find out what's happening with MercyCast and really what we're about. If you're already following the MercyCast, shoot us an email. We want to hear from you. With that said, we're going to dive right into this episode. Welcome to the MercyCast, where we are learning the art of compassion through the adversity of life. I am your host, as always, Raleigh Sadler. For those of you who've been following my story, you know that I started as a minister, and after I graduated seminary, I couldn't get a job. It was an economic downturn. There were cash for clunkers. It was a whole thing. And I'll never forget getting a job at an orphanage or a children's home. And when I was there, God just changed my heart. I started seeing vulnerability in a new light as I was seeing children who were in the foster system. And I remember just seeing these kids light up on Christmas Day and other holidays where they were in a residential home. But the whole time I was thinking, what would it look like if God's church was able to come around kids like this? There are roughly 400,000 children in the foster care system. Approximately 125,000 are available for adoption, while 25,000 age out each year. What is compassion telling us to do in this circumstance? Today, I think we're going to find our answer. I'm joined by Dr. Kimberly Offutt. She is the Executive Branch Director of Bethany Christian Services and the author of They Need You Now. Kimberly, welcome to the MercyCast.
Thank you, Raleigh. So happy to be here.
I am so encouraged just by your heart for compassion. And you don't get into this line of work by accident. That's why I shared my story, because I think when we encounter vulnerability in our path, we have to make a decision. We're either going to do something about it or we're going to ignore it. Why can't you just ignore the issues in the foster care system?
You know, that's a really good question, Raleigh. I've been in this field doing this work since 1998. That's been 26 years. Most of my adult life, I've worked in child welfare. It has only been in the last 4 or 5 that I have been intentional about asking myself and challenging the people that I work with, but I've asked them why. You know, really exploring our why and understanding our why. It's really interesting, Raleigh. Back in 2020, when the world were putting their mask on, God was telling me to take my mask off and to lean in, being honest and open and transparent and to share my why. So short answer, or maybe long answer to your question, is I see me. I see me in these kids. I see me in the families. My mama and my daddy were together since they were 12 and 13 years old, had me at 17 and 18. So if you can just imagine a 17-year-old and an 18-year-old becoming parents. We have children's age right now, right? But them becoming parents and having to step into this space of raising a child and taking care of themselves too. They could not have done it without community. They could not have done it without, my grandparents, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, and people stepping in. Because they were so young, we didn't avoid CPS, that's Child Protective Services, showing up at our door too.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, I was 5 years old when Child Protective Services showed up at my door. My elementary school teacher was actually the one to make that call when I was in kindergarten. And thankfully, they showed up on a Thursday. And I'm smiling when I say that, Raleigh, because Thursday was when Mama got paid. And on Thursdays, Mama filled up the refrigerator. On Thursday, she was at home and the house was clean. So they came in and they saw a clean home. They saw food in the refrigerator and in the pantries. And they saw well put together kids. And thankfully, that was enough, because I could have easily been in foster care
Wow.
had they dug just a little bit deeper and explored the fact that my parents were young. You know, utilities was off the week before. My father was a functioning alcoholic at the time. My grandfather was an alcoholic. I mean, there was all types of things happening in my family, but yet I stayed in what you would consider a moderately neglectful or abusive home. And here I am today, you know, I have a few degrees under my belt. I'm in this field. I'm taking care of children. I'm raising my children. I have a great relationship with my family. And I could have very easily have been one of those statistics that you mentioned earlier, a child in foster care and at risk of aging out. So long but short, a lot of stories in there about my life.
We talk about taking our mask off. And I love this picture of transparency because it's true. We are always wearing a mask. I believe even the Greek root of the word hypocrite means to wear a mask. And so many of us, we're hiding behind something. And I love how after such a robust career in the last 5 years, you say, no, we're going to talk about our why. We're going to talk about who we really are, because it's those stories, I believe, that connect. And so you talk about this moment, and the picture you paint is haunting. You're a child. CPS is on their way. What was that like to have them show up at your door when you're just a little kid?
You know, my vague memory of it, I'll just say it that way. I just remember being afraid.
Yeah.
I remember being concerned. I remember not understanding why. See, here's the thing. I tell people all the time when it comes to youth who are in foster care and who may have experienced any degree of neglect or abuse, this is their norm.
Yeah.
This is their family. This is what they know.
Yeah.
And there's safety even in that, even if there's dysfunction in that. So there was safety in the fact that I had my mama and my dad.
That's right.
There was safety in I had my siblings, even if we were hungry. There was safety in being at grandma's house, even if grandpa was drunk.
Right.
There was safety there. So I'm thankful that I wish I knew that woman's name. I can just see her face, but I wish I knew her name, and I could go back today and tell her thank you for not removing me from my mama and daddy. They just needed support. They needed someone to really help them ensure that bills were paid, that they were taking care of their kids, that we went to school every day, that we didn't not go to school because we didn't have lunch money, that we had clean clothes, that, you know, the utilities were on, that we had warm clothes when we needed it, that they had that wraparound support so they could work and grandma could take care of, or somebody could come in and care for us. My parents were young, but they loved us. And that's the thing. We see this too much. Kids who end up in the foster care system, just to share another statistic for you, Raleigh, is 70% of the children who end up in the foster care system come because of a poverty-related issue. So you're dealing with homelessness. You're dealing with utilities being cut off. You're dealing with food scarcity. You're dealing with unemployment issues. And when you have all of those things as an adult, can you imagine the weight that you may be carrying? How can you feel like a good parent when you're not able to meet your children's needs? So you see too many kids end up in the system because of that. What would compassion say to the regular, schmegular folk like my neighbor who was across the street, who made sure I was that latchkey kid.
Yeah, that's right.
She made sure I was okay, that no one came to the door, that I didn't go outside, that I didn't get kidnapped. She kept her eyes on me. Yeah. Compassion said, look out for Kim, Tasha, and PJ. Yeah. Those are my siblings. You know, so many ways we can step in and provide support to families that need that support.
Well, and you touch on something very important here. So many of us seem to isolate issues. We see things as kind of standalone issues. We're like, these
Mhm.
people are experiencing poverty. These people are in cyclical substance abuse. These people are fill in the blank. But we don't see the need for wraparound care. We don't see the need for holistic support. And I'm so glad that you touched on that because there is no isolated issue. As I'm pulling this thread on vulnerability in our communities, I'm realizing that if you're experiencing one vulnerability, chances are you're experiencing a litany of them.
Mhm.
And they're all acting in concert to keep you in a perpetual place of vulnerability. And oftentimes, the only way to break out is through the help of others. It's through that person like your neighbor who's saying, I'm keeping my eye on them. And if something happens, I'm calling their folks. We're going to have a
Yep.
conversation. I mean,
Yep.
that's how I grew up in a similar way. And my community was the same way. It's like my parents get a call. Hey, do you know where your son was today?
Yep.
It's like, because everyone was working, everyone was trying to make it work. And I just, I love that holistic focus. And
Yeah.
how do you think we start to shift? Because I know that you have a passion because you saw this growing up and you can see yourself in the shoes of the people who you work with. How do the rest of us shift to this more compassionate view?
I just feel like it takes a moment of true reflection
Mm,
and acknowledgement of who we are today and how we got here, right? We all have a little bit of dysfunction.
that's right.
No one lived an absolutely perfect life. There was somebody in your life that made an impact in your life.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just humanity, right? And regardless of how well you're living today, how if you're in that white picket fenced home and you have all of your needs met, there is an opportunity there for you to really sit back and think about what did it take to get me here and how do I now share and give in the same way that somebody else gave for me. Like, I feel like you just have to just pause and think again, what would love say do in situations that we're faced with? When we see something, we're called to do something. We're called to walk alongside. We're called to be our brothers and sisters keeper. We're called to give. We're called to be the hands and feet of Jesus, and how do we do that? That's through compassion. That's through an awareness of what he's done for us and what we're called to do for each other. We make it hard. It's not hard.
Well, first, I think these white picket fence realities are often overrated. We're often just looking for our own comfort, right? We're looking for comfort at the expense of caring for others, oftentimes. And we think as soon as I get there, then I will feel okay. When we've been given this awesome opportunity to care for the people around us and to see our community flourish.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean that we all have to have it together. Actually, it's better that we don't. Because when
There
you
we
don't
go.
have it together, you can see other people as people who are on your same level and say, we're all we've got. Like,
I tell people that all the time who step forward and they express interest in being a foster parent. If I could write up, I think I wrote that in my second book. It literally titled In Search of Imperfect People. I think that was the title in one of the
mm,
chapters, In Search of Imperfect People. We
mm,
need imperfect people who are willing to step forward to be a foster parent. You don't have to have your own home. You don't have to be rich. You don't have to have everything together. The simple fact that you got a little dirt in your backyard,
yeah,
we can plant some seeds in that. The simple fact that you may have been there and done that. You've seen some things, you've experienced some things that allows you to have some empathy and some sympathy, some compassion for life,
that's right.
right? I see me. And because I see me, I can be what I needed as a child. I can be the adult that I needed. I can walk alongside the young mom. I could just I can just imagine. My mom told me this story about how at 17 years old, this true vulnerability in taking mask off, Riley, okay? True vulnerability in taking the mask off. My mama told me this story about her being 17 years old and being pregnant, carrying her books on her belly, basically, being pregnant with me, walking across the campus. Her mother told her, you made this baby, you're going to have this baby. But my mama actually was on that bus that the abortion clinic sent to the high schools to pick up young girls who were pregnant and who wanted to have an abortion. My mama was actually on that bus. She actually signed the paperwork under a fake name. She actually put on the gown and laid on the table. My mama was this close to aborting me. Something clicked when she told me this. And she actually told me this when she was drinking some Long Island iced tea, sober man's thoughts are drunk man's words. So mama was telling me a story that she had never told me before about how close she was to aborting me. That changed everything for me at 17 years old to hear her story, to know who she was and the pain that she felt in having to walk through a pregnancy, that she was this close to surrendering, right? And then she has this child that she doesn't know what to do with, but she also have dreams and visions. My mom wanted to be a nurse. She wanted to go off to college. She wanted to do all kinds of things. My dad had an opportunity to play football on scholarship, but instead he went into the military. Like there were so many things. The fact that I was here changed the landscape of their life, right? They could not have done this, parenting me, caring for my siblings, without grandma, without our aunts and uncles and cousins, without our entire family and community partners who said, hey, baby girl, I got you. Who said, hey, son, I got you. Who looked, the church who wrapped around them. They provided support and care to them. Compassion said, help them. Taking me away from my mama, I don't know what my life would have ended up being like had I been in the foster care system. Systems are not designed to care for kids. They should be with their families. And I don't know why I told you all of that, Raleigh. So if you want to edit all of that, feel free to do so.
I love that you shared that with me, because you'd already talked about this idea of what does it take to get us here?
Yeah.
And you're part of a greater narrative. We all are. We often think that our life begins and ends with us. But no, we're like a speck in a long story of what God has been doing redemptively throughout history, but also what's been happening in our own families. And you're able to look back at that moment when your mom is on this bus and she's faced with a decision. And then thankfully she had people come around her and she was able to make a choice, and she chose you. She chose a different life. She chose an uncertain life, but she didn't do it alone. And when we think about this idea of what does compassion say do, or what does love say do, it says love our neighbor, love our friends, love the people that are in our path. And that's what happened. And so what I love about that, because you also touched on this idea of it's not enough to just consign people to an institutionalized life. We need family. We need community. Oftentimes in these institutions and in these residential centers, there will be a semblance of family, but it's not the same as living in a safe environment with parents and other family members around that can be there for you and help show you the way, help you learn how to heal, help you learn how to grow. And I think it's so important. And I'm just honored that you would share that story with me, because every one of us has to square with the fact that we are part of a greater narrative. And what happened 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 25 years ago, it still impacts who we are now. And that's something we've been entrusted with.
Yeah, Raleigh, when you started off sharing that you worked in a children's home, I don't know if your audience even understands what that looks like. So let me paint a picture real quick,
Yeah, that's
right?
probably good.
Yeah. So in a children's home, if you can just imagine on a small scale, 30 kids, right? Yeah, 30 children living under one roof. You have staff who changes shifts between 8 and 5. 8 and 5, 6 to the next morning, like 8 hour shifts. They're changing shifts. Lights are out at 9 p.m. Lights are on 6 a.m. Doors are locked and closed throughout the day, so you can't get back to your bedroom. Your room, if you were in it, is a twin size bed and a dresser, concrete walls and floors. There's shifts. And so you have to go to the bathroom at a certain time. We have meals at a certain time. There's no hugs and kisses because the staff can't hug children.
That's right.
You have on Saturdays, you get phone calls. You might get a 15-minute phone call on Saturday if someone calls you. And if you're lucky enough on Sundays, someone is there to visit you. What does that sound like? It's institutionalized, but it's almost preparing our kids for the foster care to the prison pipeline system. Because our residents, that's what they call them, residents in residential care, end up becoming inmates one day. And unfortunately, you see too many young people age out of the system, and within 3 years, 30% of them end up homeless, incarcerated, or another system raising them. And that's the criminal justice system. We need families. Psalm 68, I believe it's Psalm 68, 4-6, where it says, a father to the fatherless is God in his holy dwelling.
Yeah.
God is the lonely in families, not institutions.
That's right. I'll never forget sitting there with one of my coworkers, and we were just reflecting. We're reflecting on what we're seeing with these kids, and everyone had gone to bed. It's 11 o'clock at night. We're waiting for the next person to come in and relieve us. And as we're talking, he looks at me and he says, what scares me is some of these kids, all someone has to do is say, I love you. And these kids will ultimately do whatever that person asks of them. And we were just heartbroken because we realized that these kids are longing for family. They're longing for someone to say that they're enough, that they're okay, that they're longing for unconditional love, but many of them have never received it. And I remember that right there is what really flipped the switch for me to focus on vulnerable people. I had no idea that was happening at the time. But as I look back, I can see, I'm like, yeah, I remember these kids didn't have advocates. They were ignored by many people. Many of them end up homeless after they age out. Even though there are opportunities, like if you stay in the system, you can be given a full ride at schools, things like that. But a lot of students, they have a hard time breaking that institutionalized kind of aspect in their life. And they're looking and longing for love. And I just remember talking to my boss at the time, and we were like, it would be awesome to have churches come in and just spend one day a week with these kids and just build a relationship. Like one person come in and say hi. We'll do the background checks. They just talk to the kid for an hour and do that like almost like a mentoring program. But we couldn't get it to grow. And that's what really broke my heart, because these kids are right here. They're in desperate need of a family, because that's exactly where we were as we were in need of the gospel, as we were in need of Jesus. We couldn't fix our situation. And so, yeah, you talk about that. That brought me back. You talk about what these institutions look like, and you're 100% right. I'll never forget. It was Christmas Day, and I was lonely because I couldn't leave my job. I couldn't be with family. I was stuck in the town where I was living, and I had to go to work. So I ate at a Chinese restaurant on Christmas Day by myself. It was sad. But then I go to work and I'm with these kids. They're opening Christmas presents. And I just remember this look of joy because that was the closest thing they had to a normal Christmas. That was the closest thing they had to being surrounded by family. And they had a flicker of the joy that most kids who grow up in healthy families get every single year and almost take for granted. And so, yeah, as you were talking, I was just reminded that, yes, like these kids in the foster system, they are our neighbors. And so how do we love them? What does that look like?
You know, even as you're talking, Riley, I'm thinking about the fact that I heard somebody say this past weekend. I was at an event and I was sharing a similar story in what we're called to do and how we can really step into this space, right? And this pastor said, you can age out of a system, but you can never age out of family. And I'm like, ooh, I'm a steal that. You can age out of a system, but you can never age out of family. And I remember telling people when I would travel the world and be on all these stages and in all these different churches and talking about the need for youth who are aging out of the foster care system and how adoption, you know, it just doesn't end at 18, right? So many families think, well, this child is 16 years old. They'll be 18 soon. And I'm like, okay, you don't stop parenting at 18. You don't stop having this desire to be a part of a family because you're 18. You still have a need.
That's right.
To be a part of family. I'll never forget in 2019, I was at an event and I was sharing my personal story about being an adoptive parent and about my daughter who is a twin and how the state split Aaliyah and Alea up. You know, I adopted Alea and another family adopted Aaliyah. And I was sharing that story. And this young woman walked up to me and she handed me this book. Her book is titled A Suitcase and a Dream. And on the cover of the book, it looks like a mugshot. But as I'm listening to her, I learned that in August of 2003, that was the picture. That was the picture that the state took of her the day that she entered foster care. That's the cover of her book, A Suitcase and a Dream. And her name is Brittany. And she looked at me and she said, I was in foster care in the state of Michigan. My twin was adopted. Her twin's name is Bianca. My twin was adopted, but nobody didn't want me. She's like, I don't know why nobody wanted me. Then she looked at me and she said, will you take me? She was 27 years old. We don't age out of a desire to have family. Today, I don't know if you can see that picture on my wall, right? I'm turning it there. But that picture is me and Britt. We were at an event. It's called Family Changes Everything. And I was able to share our story at that event. I can share with you that recording from that night if you'd like to hear from it. But Brittany today calls me Dr. Mama Mentor Miss Kim. Like literally that Dr. Mama Mentor Miss Kim. Okay? That's how she addresses me. And one day she asked me, she's like, do you know why I call you all those names? And I'm like, absolutely. And because she didn't believe me, she's like, why? I said, you call me who you want me to show up to you as that day. So if you need a mama Kim. If you need a mentor in that space, I'm Mentor Kim. If you need just a friend, I'm Miss Kim. If you need someone to help you coach on your 501c3, her book, A Suitcase and a Dream, is now a nonprofit today. We helped her develop it as a nonprofit. And she actually collects suitcases. Literally, if you want to donate to A Suitcase and a Dream, she collects suitcases for youth like her who aged out of the foster care system with a suitcase and a dream. And she gives suitcases to young kids just like her, filled with all types of needs, like toiletries, pajamas, books, journals, whatever. So churches can donate to the things to fill up the suitcase or can actually donate suitcases. So A Suitcase and a Dream. So literally, if she needs advice on her nonprofit, I'm Dr. Mama Mentor, Miss Kim. That's how I show up for Brit.
You talk about this idea of not aging out of families. And I think, I don't know, I think for me, that is just an interesting way of looking at foster care, because so many times we just think of kids, we think of children, and we forget the fact that we, even if we are aged out, we need family. We need people to come alongside of us. And wow, I mean, yeah, I'm just sitting with that idea because you're right. We absolutely need it. And we don't age out of families. And here's this person at 27 saying, will you adopt me? When in the eyes of the state, you don't need to do that. But this is someone who's just saying, I need you to be my mama right now. And that's the most beautiful thing, I think, about this conversation is if you're listening and you're thinking, I don't know if I'm ready to adopt, or I don't know, let's not even go there yet. Who in your path needs family? Who in your path needs love? Who in your path needs somebody to come alongside of them and just be a friend and an advocate? Start there.
Exactly. Start with a young mom in church that you see, you know, and just invite her out to coffee. Ask her, how can you support him? What can you do? You never know. This young mom, she may just need somebody to talk to and vent to. She might not have her mother. And she may need somebody to mother her, to help encourage her as she's parenting. Like the simplest things, compassion says, compliment someone. Compassion says, be a support to somebody. Compassion says, use your time, your talent, your resources, your presence. Sometimes it's simply presence. I don't have to pay Brittany's bills. I don't have to solve Brittany's problems. I can't help her medically and financially all the time, but I can just sit next to her and be there. Sometimes it's just your presence. She literally built family around her, and her family is not blood related. Be family to somebody.
You know, I don't think Dominic Toretto could say it better. And yes, that was a Fast and Furious reference, but it's true. So many of us, when we hear about foster care or poverty or any issue in our society, we feel like the ask is always something greater than we can do. And I love how you're saying, no, like we're going to lower the bar. Just be there for somebody and start there. It's a low lift. It's something that's in your spiritual DNA. If you're a Christian, it's to love your neighbor, and your neighbor is that person in your path that is in need of help. That person who is in need of love, in need of care. I may not know what to do. I may not know how to solve any issue that you're facing because I can't really even solve my own. But I'm here and we're going to figure it out together. And I think that's it, because I think so many people are well-meaning and they want to help people regardless of the issue that they're facing, but they feel like that the lift is too heavy, that they have too many things going on. And I think the beauty of what you're saying is, no, just be family. Be that person who was across the street who kept an eye on you. Be that person who strikes up a conversation when they see you and they're like, that person looks like they need someone to talk to. Be willing to look in someone's eyes when you're walking by them and they ask you for something, rather than just pretending they don't exist. Take 10 seconds to acknowledge the presence of someone, because I think when you do that, then you actually start a personal relationship. When you start a personal relationship and you actually start caring for the person in front of you, then suddenly you start wanting to advocate for them, because now their issues are becoming your issue. Like the things that they're going through actually are becoming personal to you, and you don't want them to go through that. And I think what I love about what you're saying is you're saying, we don't need you to solve the world's problems. We just need you to address what's happening in your midst.
Yep. Yep. I'm over here thinking about all types of different things, Raleigh, but we probably could talk and share stories for days. But I went on this challenge to give a stranger a hug. I know that probably sounds a little weird, right? You out here hugging people you don't know. But literally challenge yourself. And I do silly stuff like this all the time, but it becomes so meaningful. And like that give it forward, pay it forward type of thing. It's one thing to and I don't want to minimize this, but you know how people will pay for the coffee for somebody else at Starbucks. I've never done that, even though I don't drink Starbucks, but I don't do that because I'm like, if you're at Starbucks, you can afford your coffee, right? So I don't do the Starbucks thing. But I have done things like in grocery stores, deciding to, if I see an elderly person and they're ringing up their food, I'll just add mine to that kind of a thing and, pay for grocery and bless them on their way. But I've done that whole, just give a stranger a hug. People don't bring it in. You just literally, you just look at someone just bring it in. And people have literally held on to me and have cried. You have no idea how much this hurt, even from a perfect stranger. Yeah. I've heard people who say they lost their wife, or I've lost my husband. Sorry, not wife, because I'm out here hugging grown men. But I've lost my husband. I've lost my child. I just got this cancer diagnosis. No one has hugged me in years. Thank you for seeing me. Can you imagine if you just went on this little thing about, just give a stranger a hug, bring it in, compliment someone. You never know what people have going on in their life. What would compassion say? Do? I love that challenge. So just challenge yourself to do something meaningful and compassionate to somebody.
And it's a start.
Mm-hmm.
You're looking at someone and you're giving them a hug. And when they're receiving that hug, so many people, they haven't felt that physical affirmation that someone's saying, it's okay. You're okay. I'm not running from you. I'm not keeping you at an arm's length. I've brought you in.
Mm-hmm.
And so many people haven't got that from their family. And I mean, yes, there's probably should be boundaries. We probably make sure someone doesn't have a knife before we hug them, but maybe, who knows?
Yeah.
But I love what you're doing, because you're looking at people and saying, I'm here for you. I see you. And you talked about kids being institutionalized. Oftentimes they become a statistic. We don't actually see the person. We don't hear their story. I'll never forget when I was at the children's home right after I left, and this was the hardest job I've ever had to leave. When I stepped away, because I had another job where I wasn't able to keep up with the training, and I couldn't. And it was awesome because they required it. You had to get all this training, and I just knew I couldn't get it. So, I told the kids, I was like, hey guys, I got to go. And I'll never forget these kids. But these kids pull me in and they say, what do we have to do to get you to stay? And it broke my heart.
Mm-hmm.
And as I left, I just remember just putting on Facebook just how much I was going to miss these kids. I mean, what I hate is so many people don't even really have the opportunity to see these people in their path because they're in the institution. And so roughly a couple weeks after I left, there was an ad in the local newspaper, and it was just a bunch of pictures of the kids, and their faces were covered, but they were dressed as superheroes. And it was the sweetest thing. And I actually got one of the pictures of one of the kids. He gave it to me and he's like, here you go. And I'm like, man, this is really cool. It was like, I mean, I loved these kids. And what I loved about that act was when the paper did that, they were saying, these aren't inmates, they're children. They're children who are in need of love. They're children who are in need of healthy families. And it was, I think, even an encouragement for adoption. Because you're never going to love your neighbor if you don't know they exist. And I think for so many of us, it's just not in our orbit. And what I love about this podcast is we're talking about kids who are in our community. They're not far from you. They're miles away from you. And so what does it look like for us to love our vulnerable neighbor in the foster care system? Does it look like visiting a residential home? Does it look like in-state adoption? Does it look like partnering with services like Bethany Christian to see how you can help or engage or care for these kids in need of a family?
Mm-hmm. Does it look like supporting a foster parent who is doing the work?
Wow.
Providing a meal, volunteering in some kind of way, mowing a lawn, doing a haircut or two, easy things. It's easy things. It's how do I truly feel like everyone is not called to be a foster parent or adopting a parent, adopt a child. Everyone is not called to
That's
do
right.
that. But we all are called to care, right? We all have a gift, a talent, a resource, some type of way that we can be involved. We all can pray. Every one
That's right.
of us can pray. We can't do anything else. We can pray for these kids. We can pray for their parents. We can pray for their foster parents. We can pray for their future. We can pray for every person who has an impact in their life. We can intentionally pray. And then after we pray, what can you do? How can you step in and be a support to transform the system, to support the ones who are in the system, to walk alongside the young people as they're aging out of the system? Donating some old suitcases to a suitcase and a dream, or some book bags, or some duffel bags, providing personal care products or t-shirts and underwear, doing a diaper drive or a backpack drive or whatever it is that you can easily pull people together to do, to be a part of the solution, to help, to support. It's not hard.
No, it isn't, is it? It's not hard. And this conversation, we've gone from talking about statistics to stories and now to just a moment. Like, what does it look like to engage your vulnerable neighbor in the most basic way possible? Kimberly, how would you encourage us in these last moments to do that? Like, what are some very basic things we can do to take the tiniest of baby steps towards our vulnerable neighbors?
I would simply start with prayer and also being intentional about your day and being intentional about ways that you can give back. Being intentional about learning about your community and the needs in your community, or maybe in the areas right outside of your community. And I say it that way because some of us have gotten very comfortable and we're removed from people who have needs.
That's right.
Right? So being very intentional about connecting with communities who have needs, and not to come in and try to be anyone's savior, because there's only one savior.
That's right.
Right? But being compassionate in a way that you're walking alongside and you're offering your care, you're offering your support, you're offering your presence. But you don't know what you don't know if you don't ask the questions. If you don't pick up the phone and call a Bethany Christian Services, 1-800-BETHANY, and just say, hey, I'm here. I want to support. How can I support? Going to our website and looking at volunteer opportunities. Right there in your church. How about ask the question, who in here is caring for children that you didn't give birth to? You'll never know. You'll find out about this grandma who's raising her grandkids, or who this aunt who's taking care of her nieces and nephews, or this perfect stranger who's actually a foster parent or an adoptive parent who are caring for children and they need your support. A lot of pastors aren't asking the question to even know, how can I support you if I don't know that you need that support as well? So asking the questions, being intentional, lean in, listen and learn, pray, and then do.
I love
But
that.
don't make it hard. I keep saying it. Don't make it hard.
Yeah,
It's not brain science.
that's
It's
right.
easy. It's humanity.
That's
Think
right.
about this. And I told somebody, and I know I'm going to let you go, Riley, because I feel like I'm long. You ever been on the phone with somebody and it's like, okay, I'm not going to hold you long. But think about this. When you became a parent, there was no manual, right? You didn't get a manual on how to take care of this child. But you needed so much. You needed people. You needed community. You needed support. You needed help. You had resources. People gave you diapers. People had baby showers for you. Someone volunteered to take care of your child. Someone came in to help you rest. You know, people brought meals. When I had my babies, people brought meals for a week. We didn't even have to worry about cooking dinner. You know, community. It wasn't hard. We just did what we wanted somebody else to do for us. That's compassion. That's why I keep saying it's not hard. What would you want someone to do for you if you were in that space? What would I need? I would need these things. Think about what you would need. It's not hard.
That is the perfect question to end on. What would you need from others if you were in that space? Because that brings us back to the heart of it. Kimberly, thank you so much for being on today. This conversation's been good.
Thank you for the opportunity.